excellent panel and a very rich subject to talk about. Having previously discussed a 5-word question, did we get it right? As part of our new, more aligned and streamlined approach, we now have a 4-word question. Where do we stand? That's 20% reduction in word use right there. Standing up to be counted are our panel, 5 people with very similar but not quite identical senior government positions in education, and 5 similar but not quite the same job titles, so I'm bound to get at least one of these wrong. Apologies. Please welcome the Swiss Secretary of State for Education, Research and Innovation, Mauro Dell'Ambrogio. Coming in from that side. The State Secretary in the Norwegian Ministry for Education and Research, Bjørn Haugstad. The first speaker you might remember many hours ago was the Swedish Minister for Higher Education and Research, Helene Hellmark Knutsson. Now we're hearing from the State Secretary to that Minister, Anders Lönn. The Permanent Secretary at the Danish Ministry of Higher Education and Science, Agnete Gersing. And the State Secretary of the Ministry of Education, Science, Research and Sport of the Slovak Republic, Romana Kanovska. That is your highly educated panel. And to chair the discussion, it is my pleasure to welcome the Director General of the EC's Directorate General for Research and Innovation, Robert Jan Smits.
Well, I propose that we start immediately, because it's been a long day and quite a rich, I think, series of discussions. I was, though, a bit surprised by the question about the impacts of the first Lund Declaration. People say, well, you know, there are some positive things, some negative things. Were there any feedback given? I think the first Lund Declaration had an enormous impact, because, first of all, it shaped completely the approach of Horizon 2020. We stepped away from a thematic approach, having program on physics, on materials, on social science, humanity, and went to ground societal challenges. And I've seen that similar change in policy approach also happening in member states. Many countries are now going to ground societal challenges instead of having a traditional thematic approach. So for me, Lund Declaration #1 has an enormous impact in shaping policy and going to its new policy approaches. Now, with Lund 2, it's for me all about commitment and delivery. That brings me to a number of questions to the panelists, and I start with first Bjørn. We hear a lot about cooperation up in the north here between the Scandinavian countries. Northforsk is often mentioned. Is this now the model for joint programming addressing societal challenges? Can the rest of Europe learn from what is happening in the north, notably to roll out now this Lund 2 declaration?
Thank you. Let me first of all just say that I completely agree with you that the first Lund Declaration has had huge impact, because it has transformed the way we are discussing research, politics and policy, at least in Norway. I totally agree. Well, Nordic cooperation has been around for decades. And when we get it right, I would say it's because of 4 factors, simple in principle, but more difficult in practice. The first is when we are able to realize and recognize that each of us are too small to be self-sufficient. Second is when we also recognize that we have important interests in common, and that it's much better to hang together than get hung separately. And I think this is also, even if the Nordic countries are small countries, I think this is relevant also for larger countries in Europe. The third and more difficult factor is that we have to accept differences. Outside of the Nordic countries, we are often lumped together as these tall Nordic light people. We, of course, know better. There are huge differences between us. And it's actually those differences that makes it interesting to cooperate. because we have complementarity among the nations, both when it comes to, well, culture and also research strength. And the fourth factor is mutual trust. And the mutual trust makes us able to take more and accept more risks. And as Norwegians, trusting that the Danes and the Swedes and the Finns and the Icelandics are probably doing things quite competently, even if they're not following our principles in all the ways. So I think that's the four key factors when we succeed.
All right, thank you very much. And you underline particularly the word trust, which I think is essential to make joint programming and working together to address the grand societal challenges a reality. I move to another part of this Lund Revisited declaration, and that is the investments in frontier research on basic science. I'm very happy that this statement is so explicitly mentioned in the new Lund declaration, because I see across the board in many countries in Europe that the science budget is being cut. And not only in Europe, I see that also happening in countries like Singapore, I see it happening in the United States. And I think it's not a good development. There's one country in Europe which is still the stronghold of frontier research, and that's Switzerland. And Mauro, are you going to follow the trend of all the others and cutting the basic science budget, or are you really staying on course? And why are you staying on course if you're going to stay on course?
We don't want to change our course. Still, we try to be consequent with the definition itself. The difference between basic and applied science. That means basic science is what is not likely to bring back a return of investment in short or middle term. It should be made by the public hand. And the public hand had to do this. And applied research, in principle, is made by the private sector. The private sector in Switzerland, the pharmaceutical, and so on, they told us, they say, please make good education, please deliver us good PhDs, applied research is our issue. And we try to go on this tradition. And we are convinced that, as was said before, the key factor of research in general are people and infrastructure. And people should be trained, should be taught on basic research, first of all. We are not only to produce engineers. Engineers are important, but we have to produce scientists. Scientists should have a more non-conventional approach to problems than engineers. They are at once focused on problem solving. We need people that are able to set the right question, first of all. But it's not a recipe that they would say should be universal, because I was quite skeptical on this new trend, new focus concept, alignment. Alignment could be interpreted in the sense that should be made in the same way everywhere. I'm as well convinced. I was impressed by the keynote of Professor Jasanoff this morning. Complementarity and subsidiarity is key, and the role of a country like Switzerland, having a good tradition, a good infrastructure, he is to play this role to teach young scientists from all Europe. You have 60 to 80% of our PhD students and postdoc are not Swiss. They came from abroad, the most from Switzerland, make a part of their first career steps in basic research, and then they go back in their country for different, for become professor or work in development. You made a similar experience as well, Robert Jan, I suppose. That's our role, and we are proud of this role in Europe. We don't pretend that our solution, our recipe is the better for everyone, but we still stay on this trend.
Well, I think you're not the only one who is continuing to invest in frontier research and in basic science. Anders, I move to you, and I look here at this region, Lund, Skåne region, big investments in Max 4, big investment in European Spallation Source. That shows also that here you are committed to frontier research, that you are committed to basic science. But perhaps it's important that you can also say a few words about how does big science, how do these big infrastructures contribute to solving societal issues?
Yes, well, let me first say that I think research infrastructures like ESS and MAX4 can contribute to face societal challenges. But first of all, let me say that I'm very proud to have ESS here in Lund, and I want to thank every country that contribute to the facilities. Well, ESS together with MAX4, and it's important to see the two together because the two of them are not. The two of them are much bigger than ESS on its own and MAX4 on its own. And the possibilities, I think, are really big in the combination of MAX4 and the ESS. I think one important role is that infrastructure like ESS and MAX4 could work like attractors to excellent researchers, innovators, and private capital. And that way we could manage to tackle the societal challenges, because ESS with the neutron and MAX4 with X-ray, it's about material science, and I think material science is an excellent tool just to tackle societal challenges in many ways, because it's not just material like we think about it, it's also biological material. So I think here we have a connection to societal challenges like health and better medicines and treatments. And also, of course, when it comes to material science, a connection to, for example, better energy solutions. So I think, like attractors, they could really help us to tackle the societal challenges.
Thank you. Romana, I turn to you. In this Lund Revisited Declaration, there is quite a strong statement on impact. And that gives the impression that in the past, even if we have been addressing the ground societal challenges, we have not really been able to roll it out to the citizen and to show what it has brought to the citizen. Do you think we have been falling short? We have not delivered to what the citizen is expecting from science?
It's absolutely crucial to further support the European partnership to promote growth based on increasing innovation capability in Europe and creating a dynamic, open and inclusive, innovative society. Lund 2009 declaration was well received and we can see that many of its recommendations and visions were included in European programs, for example, mainly in Horizon 2020 and also on national level. European countries have adopted smart specialization strategies, which should help to exploit the result of research based on its capacities. On national level, I think we have created opportunity for partners from university, research organization and industry to be active participants in the process of identifying common research priorities to ensure shift towards the demand-driven research in our country. We should further promote the support for innovate industry and create an environment for effective partnership between academy and industry. We can support the idea to shift from industrial basic funding of universities and public research organization to more competitive funding. As a matter, for example, in Slovakia, this fact, we are already planned under the new state budget to increase the part of competitive funding for this institution in Slovakia. We would also like to focus on the new generation of scientists and attract young people to the science and research area. And Slovakia, as one of the countries which suffer from brain drain, we would like to highlight priority to attract scientists, for example, from third countries to our science environment, and we believe that we should also support the visibility and role of societal challenges and humanities, which could contribute to the crucial mission of tackling the difficult challenges of economic decline, for example, or unemployment and mass immigration, and are in unique position to exploiting the research result to ensure the well-being of our citizens.
Interesting your emphasis on young people and the brain drain. In 7 months from now, you'll be in charge of Europe. It will be your presidency, and I think this will probably be a topic which you put high on the agenda.
Yes.
We have had already discussions on it in Bratislava, so get prepared for your 6 months in charge of Europe. The Lund Revisited Declaration, very clear statements, impact, internationalization, frontier research, alignment. I come back to the alignment in a second. But Agnete, what next now? What next? Is this just another statement and we go home after having had another coffee and then we go back to business, or is this a game changer?
Well, I don't think it's a game changer as such. I would say when we look forward, I think that on the one hand, the road ahead is in many ways neatly paved, so to speak. We have Horizon 2020 in place. We agree on the main priorities. In many respects, we have new instruments and we have indications that it works quite well, although we also have room for improvement. So one could argue that the next step is just, well, have some coffee, go home, put the foot before the other, and then just ahead. On the other hand, I think it's not as easy as that. And I don't think that, although it's a very good declaration, I don't think it's a game changer. But I do think that we have to think very carefully about how we move forward, although we agree on the direction. And I think it's important to realize that research and development is an investment. Of course, it is I think it's an important value, and it's also in most Western societies a goal in itself, just to gain new insights, gain new knowledge, the curiosity-driven aspect. But it is, from a societal point of view, it is a quite big investment, and we expect a return that in the sense of contribution to growth, contribution to prosperity, and to public welfare in general. And also in the sense of contributing to solving the grand challenges. And I think there's no doubt we have ample evidence that research does give it as a return on average. But we have to learn a lot more about how to maximize the returns, how to maximize the gains from our investment. And I am quite sure also that not only do we have a lot to learn about how to maximize it, but we still have a way to go to actually do that. And I think that is very important also due to the fact that we have in all of Europe and basically I think most of the world pretty strict. We have a serious situation as for public finances, as you yourself mentioned beforehand. We see budget cuts in most countries, and in Denmark, Danish government just decided a few months ago to cut back on public research expenses. So it is very important for us to, as we go along, to seriously learn from our experience and all the way reflect on, try to demonstrate, try to learn how do we maximize impact. And that is for different areas of research. There's different instruments, how we can work together, and not least how we bring the insights, the knowledge that we gain from science, from research out in the society. And not only bringing it out, but also demonstrate that that's what we do and communicate it efficiently to the public, to the politicians. Because if we don't succeed in that respect, I think it's going to be very difficult to continue investing and maybe investing more in research. And I'm pretty convinced it's a good investment, but it's very important, I think, to focus, doing the right thing, but also continue to learn from what we do and how to maximize impact and to demonstrate it convincingly.
I deliberately used the word game changer for the first Lund declaration, and that's why I took a little bit distance from the previous panels, because I think it was a game changer, because it has led to a new approach in policy setting. And I see that, as I mentioned before, not only on the Horizon 2020, where we moved from a thematic approach to ground societal challenge, but I see so many countries now aligning their own national programs to that. So for me, Lund 1 was a game changer with regard to policy orientation. And that's why I also want to hear from the other panel members, in order to make this Lund 2 declaration, the Lund Revisited declaration, successful, that it does not remain something which we put in a drawer and we forget about. What is necessary for things to change in order to have a successful follow-up to this second Lund declaration? Björn, what must change in order to make this really a successful declaration and not just another piece of paper?
Well, if I have the time, I think there are three things that are important. The first is making the JPIs a real success. Today, the Norwegian participation in Horizon 2020 can keep me awake at night. Our success in JPIs is not. So I think it needs to get higher on the political agenda, and I think that's particularly important for small countries. Second is that societal challenges really begs this cross-border collaboration we have been talking for decades. Academia, industry, interdisciplinarity, policy areas, international cooperation, and I think we really need to integrate social sciences and humanities into this grand challenges approach, and I think a lot of that responsibility lies with the humanities and arts and social sciences themselves. The third point is that I think we got to get whole of Europe or whole of European Union and then people like us on board, because the success rates is very different but, among the European nations so far, and I think that might undermine the legitimacy. So I think you should consider even more strongly how you can use the structural funds. We also have the EEA and Norway grants for beneficiary countries and how they can support stronger participation in the European-wide competitions. So those 3 points for me.
Okay, and Mauro, from your point of view.
In general, good ideas don't have not the necessity to be diffused in a proactive way.
Is it working?
But perhaps it's better in this way. If it's a good idea, I suppose that every policy makers on the EU level and national level will be influenced. But let's try with a paradox. If you only focus on grand societal challenges, you can have the temptation to say, okay, terrorism, we need to do research in this field because it's a new challenge. And what to do, technologies, better intelligent software or better detectors for explosive, or you can do social science. You can develop research on the background, the reasons and so on, probability, and then you have to share how much in general, 99% technology, 1% social sciences. But nobody put the question, makes sense to put hundreds of millions on research activities, perhaps on cost, but the problem of today's society in Europe is the lack of resources, especially in the public sector, of lack of resources, for example, to offer employment to young Muslims. We have to be careful not to put research in the center of all the possible solutions of all possible challenges. The first question you have to put is a problem for research or is a problem to develop new policies, and not to over-evaluate the role of science and research in this field, not make the mistake that we made for decades in Europe to over-evaluate the scientific background of education as a key for every kind of education, and now we have a youth unemployment, and from my point of view, too much mass universities and not high-quality universities in this continent.
Thank you very much. So not too many high expectations, yet politicians want to set the agenda. And I think the approach which we certainly have taken with Horizon 2020, with the 3 pillars, is about who sets the agenda. Pillar 1, action and science, it's the individual researcher. There's not a single politician who influences that. The pillar on industrial leadership is the industry which sets the agenda. And the third one, the grand societal challenges, it is the politicians which set the agenda. Whereby I think indeed Mauro has a point, we have to be very careful that that gives the impression that science can solve all societal challenges, which it cannot. It can provide scientific support to policy making, and it can solve a lot of problems, but it cannot solve everything. Anders, in order to make this Lund Revisited Declaration a success, what is needed?
Well, first I agree with my Swiss colleague, and I think it's really important, because otherwise that we don't think that research could solve every problem, or that innovation is connected to research all the time. That's not correct, I think, and it's a little bit dangerous, because if that is the picture in the public, we do get problems to maintain investments. So, because of course we have to focus on better use of the resources, but we also have to maintain investment, because the competition globally leads to that we have to attract private investments in research and innovation as well. So we need to maintain investment from the public as well. I think some important points is that we need to be a little bit more open globally, and finding perhaps new solutions in terms of financing third country cooperation in Horizon 2020. And besides that, I completely agree with my Norwegian colleague when it comes to integrate social science and humanities in tackling societal challenges. I think that's 2 really important points.
Romana, anything for your side to add in order to make Lund Revisited a success?
I'm completely agree with my colleagues, but I would like to notice one point of view, and this is that we have to think also about the possible geographical barriers throughout Europe. We have to, I think, actively seek solutions to open the European programs and consortia for participation of excellence research teams from all EU regions in order to ensure the spread of excellence. And Europe Commission have already created successful instruments under the Spreading Excellence and Widening Participation theme of Horizon 2020, and we can build open as we need more long-term solutions.
I would like to come back perhaps to another point which came frequently forward, and which is, are we not, with the joint programming activities we have up to now, completely getting involved in discussions on all kinds of technicalities, joint calls, how much money is being pooled, all kinds of complex bureaucratic procedures, instead of keeping a more political focus, which is the alignment or the joint agenda setting. Björn rightly says that if Lund Revisited, the declaration we adopt today, if that is going to be successful, it is essential that we show that joint programming can work, and that we have commitment, and that we don't get bogged down in all kinds of technical details which then completely distract us from what it is all about. Because alignment is not about a number of joint calls which is organized. And alignment does not mean that all the programs look the same, as Mauro said. And alignment does also not mean that in Poland they make the cars, and in Germany the engine, and another country that is not alignment. So I think also there we have to clearly state what is alignment and what it is not. Agnete, what is your view on this?
Well, I would like to say a few words about how we make this successful. And I think from an overall perspective, I have 2 points. The first, I think, don't overdo it, because the 4 priorities, I think that they're very good, but at least 3 of them can be overdone in the way that alignment is very good as to trying to maximize the output, the effect of our resources seen as a whole. But we can, I think it was Michael beforehand earlier today that touched upon this. Alignment doesn't mean non-fragmentation. We have to also to realize that it might be very valuable to have little groups and not aligning everything, and also having competing systems, competing ways to go forward before we can actually find the right ways, the best ways. And we can also, another thing that we can overdo, I think, it's focusing on the grand challenges. That is obviously important, but as Mauro stated, we have to keep in mind that also basic research, where we don't focus on a special challenge, is very important, because sometimes the great breakthroughs come when you don't look for anything specifically, and that would really be a disaster, I think, if we focus too much. And the one thing that we can't overdo, I think, is excellence. That's not up for discussion. But my first point would be don't overdo it. And my second, which is connected to that, is keep thinking critically about what we do while we go forward. I think it is definitely the right way to go now, but it's not necessarily the right priorities in maybe 2 years, maybe 4, 5 years' time. And I think it's very important in all we do that we take one step and then we reflect on where did it lead us, what are the challenges now, what would be the right thing to do. Just not on an everyday basis, of course, but basically having a critical view as to what we are doing, what is the impact, and what could we do instead, and do we still have our priorities right. So don't overdo it and keep thinking.
All right. Don't overdo it. Although, if I look at the experience, which we heard also this morning about the joint program initiatives, there still needs to be a lot of overdoing done by member states in order to make it a success. Let's be frank about it. All right. Perhaps there may be some final comments, questions, observations in the audience to these politicians sitting here, because all these people have political functions and play, of course, an important role in implementing and defining policies. Who would like to come in with a question, comment, observation about what was discussed here now, making the Lund Revisited Declaration a success? Who would like to come in? Not all at the same time. Yes, one over there. Can you introduce yourself?
Patrick Monfrave, I'm GPI Climate Chair. I have 2 comments. One is about the alignment. I fully share the ideas. We have to define what could be smart alignment within each national research system, but also smart specialization, and also maybe smart diversity. We need a spectra and a balance between these different stuff. The second thing, it's about the global. I think we should make something more exciting than just connect or ensure European initiative in the world. In 2030, now we have new UN Sustainable Development Goals, and Europe could play a big role in forging this agenda, but also research and innovation could play in coming years and in coming decades a huge support for these Sustainable Development Goals. So I would suggest to integrate the Lund Declaration in the global perspective on contribution to SDGs that have been ratified by nations.
Thank you very much. So a plea for smart alignment, and secondly, indeed, this global dimension, which is explicitly mentioned in the Lund Revisited Declaration, to really make that better known and to implement that rapidly. Anyone else with comments of observations? Yes, go ahead.
Just a comment. I think that it would be very important to not to start knowing what the grand challenges are. We're taking them for granted, but they are complex, and we all know that. And we have asked the question about how do we foresee the unexpected or are prepared for the unexpected. I would like to see an open call on what is the ecosystem of the grand challenges. What are they? Not to take them for granted, but start by discussing that. And I think that would also be a smart way of involving social science and humanities. It might be war, it might be climate, it might be the interaction between war, climate, and health issues, and migration. And I think we skip that too fast. Now we are stuck in these kind of predefined grand challenges. So that is one comment. The other one comment actually emerges from this morning's absolutely stunning presentation by Sheila Yasanov, where she talked about the role of researchers. And I think all the questions that have come here now on where should we stop? Don't expect results and so on. Maybe it should be, and this is more a little bit of a comment and a question, more of a dialogue between politicians and top researchers. And how do we accomplish that? Instead of expecting the results, to think about how do we interact in our discussions and maybe accomplish something like science diplomacy, which is so much needed now.
That's a rich intervention, and perhaps anyone would like to react to that. I notably agree with your point about flexibility, that there should be room to come up with rapid new approaches to new challenges which we cannot even predict. It's about predicting the unpredictable and not sticking to the grand societal challenges we have now defined, because there are constantly coming up new ones which we have not even been able to identify, and these are then the most damaging ones or the most promising ones. Any reactions from the panel on that? Björn and then Mauro.
The researcher in me wants to embrace that notion enthusiastically, that we should also discuss what are the grand challenges. The politician in me says, well, please don't make my world even more complex than it is. We really, some of these grand challenges, we really need to get into how are we tackling them. For instance, climate change. There is still a lot of convincing to do to get people, citizens, understand that this has a real impact, and we have to invest in solving this problem. A discussion, academically interesting discussion, is this a grand challenge or not? Not going to help us. Much more interesting, what are the impacts? How can we deal with such a challenge the best way? What's the role of new technology? What's the role of making behavioral adaptation? And what's the interplay between new technology and, so to speak, the sociology of people? I think that's where we really need more help from scientists, and including social scientists and the scientific community.
A key word, ecosystem. Ecosystem is a decisive factor, but it's by far more difficult to create an ecosystem than to create funding scheme, programs, or institution. You can do it only in the very, very long term, and sometimes not possible at all. I can tell a story. 8 years ago, a minister of an East European country asked me what could be a suggestion to keep talents in the country and to attract talents and not to have brain drain. What could be a suggestion from Switzerland? And I said, the only way talented people look for international environment, first of all, because the better start of a career is an international environment. Choose one university, set the goal to have 50% foreign professor, 50% foreign students, and put on it. And the answer was, if I do this, I am not re-elected, because people in my country expected that the position are for them. And see that the limit of the possibility in politics, every country has its limits, and Switzerland has the limit that the cost of living is too high, extremely high, and to be competitive in certain activities is practically impossible. I think the first thing is to recognize what is the existing ecosystem and try to be a niche in some way to offer something as a better seller position or to be a piece of the puzzle of a successful Europe if possible.
All right, who is the last person who has the final burning question or comment? This is your moment to do it. Over there, go ahead. Is that Lydia?
Yes, thank you. Just a comment. I would like to make a call for, let's say, co-responsibility. I think that in this last version of the Lund Declaration that we have received today, there is a lot of emphasis on the public sector, the role of the public sector, which is absolutely right. However, the mobilization that we are trying to achieve cannot be just put on the hands of the public sector. And mobilizing the private sector for the long term is extremely difficult. So I think that some room for action on this part is needed. Just a very short example. We are trying to mobilize universities in energy, and we are trying to mobilize along companies in the energy sector to tell us what do they need from universities for the future. Very difficult. Just it's a co-responsibility.
I think it's a good point to end on that. Co-responsibility, the importance of involving the private sector. There's a person here who feels very lonely. He's called Jan Erik. So please talk to him how to get his long-term buy-in into this endeavor of addressing the grand societal challenges. I would like to thank the panelists, and please give them a big hand.
And,
but before he closes, I would like to do something else, and that is on behalf of all of us here present, because they're not going to do it, they are too shy or polite for that, to thank our Swedish hosts. Really, they did a first-class job. It was an amazing event, great hospitality, great discussions, also quite innovative and quite lively, not these lengthy, boring presentations, but very modern way of, innovative way of working. And this shows once again that we have in Europe an enormous amount of creativity, an enormous amount of innovation capabilities. Here in Lund, if I see what's going on, what you're doing here, not only in the university, in the region with the spallation source with Max 4, it is amazing what you have to offer and what Europe as a whole has to offer. So let's give also a big hand to our Swedish hosts.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So let me now take over as a moderator to close this, I think, very important meeting. First of all, I would like to mention that I met with Robert Jan a little bit more than a year ago, and it was Robert Jan's suggestion that we should start this Lund Revisited activity. So I would like to thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to do this work. Is it okay if I ask you one question? Yeah? So you have been talking now to all the member states here about what is the next step following the Lund Revisited. I mean, if you think from the Commission side, what can you do? What is your next step following the Lund Revisited declaration?
You have a couple of hours or not? No, it is clear that we will always support this joint programming. We will do everything to really support the different initiatives following, of course, the Lund Revisited Declaration. But, and I think that was the key message once again here, member states have to really show their commitment. I am very sad about the story of Share. I don't know whether the lady of Share is still here in the room. This is a first-class European infrastructure, one of the best I've ever seen. And I have really tears in my eyes if I see how Axel Bouwsoepan and you have to go around with your heads collecting money from the member states for a database which we all need for policy making, but no one wants to pay for. So what I'm going to do in the next years to come is not only to give support through Horizon 2020 to joint programming and other related initiatives, but also really to encourage member states to step up their commitments to make joint programming a success. Because it's only through working together, co-designing, that we can make a difference. And we have so much to offer, but the problem with Europe is always that everyone still wants to do it his or her way, which then is not leading to the outcome which we would like to see. So our role will be very much keeping joint programming high on the agenda, deploying our financial tools, but also mentioning to member states, step up the gear, take your responsibility. Can I go home now?
Thank you very much for that comment.